Hello everybody, this is Papa Wegson back out with another YouTube page, and the topic I'm spending on a topic we went over earlier was about venting strategically, not recklessly. So we all have these emotions and feelings that are a lot of times legit, but you want to make sure that when we try to have other people understand how we feel, that we do it in a strategic way that would get them to want to help us, rather than vent recklessly and just turn people away from us, and which is always hard because we do have the legit emotions, and I'm an emotional guy. I get emotions, and it's not always easy for me, but we have a cause that you want to promote, that you want to make sure it's strategic. So one of the main issues in Hawaii is independence. Okay, so Hawaii was an independent nation until 1898. 1893 there was an overthrow of the monarchy, which had European American guys that overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy, and they wanted the U.S. to take over Hawaii. But then 1893 the U.S. had a new president, Grover Cleveland, that didn't want to take over Hawaii, and then they waited another 5 years, and we had another president, William McKinley, who took over Hawaii for the United States. So that's been a sensitive issue, and I think that Hawaii can be an independent nation again. It's been independent before, and we have all these and we had during the Hawaiian monarchy, we already had like rulers who were interested in the modern invasions of the world at the time, and Hawaii is a trading area, and so Hawaii can be independent, and as long as you have the right leadership. And but then ever since the U.S. took over, like their education system kind of kind of brainwashed their kids to think of themselves as part of the United States, instead of just thinking as a possibility of Hawaii being an independent nation again. And we're kind of taught to be we're Americans, and not really taught to be they're part of an independent nation. That's a legit thing to bring up. But then the Hawaii sovereignty movement, there's people who are very reckless. Not everybody. There's a lot of people who are accommodating and have a lot of aloha for everybody. But then the cause of the Hawaii independence movement has been ruined by very reckless speakers, and the worst offender of all is Haunani-Kay Trask. Well, she was more vocal back in the 90s and early 2000s. After that, she kind of faded out, but the damage had already been done. And also, I went to another one of those events that there was one of those spoken word event going on with one Hawaiian activist saying, "Oh, we know we need to control our borders. I hate to sound like Donald Trump, but we need to control our borders. We don't want any more newcomers, too many newcomers coming in." And see, stuff like that is reckless and not strategic. Because Hawaii, to be independent, we need to be strategic. Like Haunani-Kay Trask always, saying Hawaii could benefit from one less haole, which is a word commonly used to refer to people of European ancestry. So they say, "Oh, Hawaii could benefit from one less haole." See, stuff like that does not gain support for the Hawaii independence movement. Or when she says that the other ethnic groups need to recognize their role as uninvited guests. See, when you say stuff like that, you're not helping the cause. You're hurting the cause. Because in Hawaii, you have the Native Hawaiians, but also a lot of Japanese and Filipinos both groups outnumber Native Hawaiians, and also a lot of European Americans also outnumber Hawaiians. So, you're Native Hawaiian, you want to be an independent nation again, you need the support of other ethnic groups. Do the math. Maybe you wish your ethnic group was the majority again, but do the math right now. The reality is that Hawaii, we have other ethnic groups. You have the European Americans, the Filipinos, the Japanese, other ethnic groups. You need their support if you want independence. You need to convince them that being independent is the way to go for Hawaii. You need to convince them that they're going to be welcome and to stick around, because if not, if you don't make them feel welcome, well, they'll be like, if you then, you remain a territory of the U.S. See, that's what the people like Haunani-Kay Trask and all these other her sympathizers don't understand, is when they when they bash like non-native people, bash people who are not native Hawaiians, like you're signaling to them that you encourage them to have an "fu, you're gonna still be a territory" attitude. You're encouraging that. But if you want to be independent, you gotta encourage the general population that independence is good for Hawaiians and it's good for everybody else too. It's good for all of Hawaii, all the people of Hawaii. Like when Nelson Mandela fought against apartheid, fought against European domination of South Africa, he was strategic. He recognized, okay, yes, the Europeans who are living in South Africa have been there for generations. They're not going to go back to Europe. They feel disconnected from Europe already. That you need to get their support and make them, convince them that South Africa that with black leadership can be just as good as South Africa under white leadership. Of course, you can't convince everybody. I mean, there's still gonna be the fanatics who wish for European domination again, but he was able to at least convince enough white South Africans to say, hey, you know what? Maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to allow native South Africans to have leadership positions in South Africa. He was strategic. He recognized he couldn't win over everybody, but you gotta win over enough people to where you can actually gain support. That's the thing with the Hawaiian sovereignty movement. You gotta be able to get enough people to enough like Asians and Europeans living in Hawaii to say, you know what, yeah, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to Hawaii to be independent again. Maybe I won't have to be afraid to kicked out of the only home my family lived in for generations. Maybe I won't have to worry about being deported just because I don't have Native Hawaiian blood. See, you gotta convince people. Like for me, like what convinced me about being Hawaii independent again, not only because it was already an independent nation, but also I think Hawaii can do better economically without the U.S. imposed Jones Act, which is a shipping law that imposed a whole bunch of undue restrictions on shipping between any port controlled by the U.S. I hate the Jones Act. If Hawaii was independent, hey, we can have ships from all over the world come to us instead of only relying on U.S. ships. We can expand our access to international trade. Because we're in an island, we're in the middle of the ocean, we need more access to international trade. Not just only rely on the United States monopoly. So yes, the independent Hawaii can still trade with the United States, but it can also, not put all the eggs in one basket, You can also put eggs in like Japanese baskets, Mexican baskets, Chilean baskets, Australian baskets, New Zealand baskets, and also like encourage trade with other Pacific islands. Encourage trade with like Fiji, Tonga, Tahiti, Micronesian islands, Melanesian islands. And we need to convince the general public of Hawaii that, whether it's Asians, Europeans, whatever else, that that independence has benefited the Polynesians living independent nations like Tonga. It has benefited like in some ways people of independent nations of Melanesia or whatever. Like there's some benefits to it. Or it can also convince people of Hawaii that Singapore's independent, and you know what? It's a multiracial nation. It's not perfect, but it's a multiracial nation. Like, there's some tension, but I think most people get along, most of them anyways. I mean, there's always gonna be some people who are like negative, but it's been able to like be a very stable nation, very small, independent, wealthy, trading, all that good stuff. So we need to convince the people about that. Convince that Hawaii can have its own military force instead of relying on the U.S. all the time. That we can keep our tax revenues here in Hawaii instead of having all these tax revenues sent to D.C. and have all the senators from other states argue over what to do with our money. So you need to convince the public about that. But if you're going to say effing haole this, effing haole that, you're not going to get support. You're going to scare away potential supporters. Yes, there are always going to be some Europeans or European descendants who think they should run the road and who sympathize with Donald Trump, but not all of them. A lot of them can be convinced to side with the white independence movement. I know a lot of them are. Like most of the European descendants that I know are sympathetic with Hawaiian, causes. They know sympathetic with like the wanting to learn more about the culture, respect the culture. A lot of them are. Yes, you always have the drunk tourist in Waikiki or drunk military guy that causes trouble, but most of the European descendants that I know are, want to learn about Hawaiian culture, but maybe they need a little more convincing that maybe Hawaii can be independent. You gotta welcome them. Say, hey, you're welcome to stay, but this is our land, and we want you to respect our culture, and we want you to understand that we were independent before, and we can't be independent again. You gotta welcome that. Same with the Asian descendants or Asian immigrants that, hey, you're welcome to stay, but you want to be independent. If there's benefits being independent, and it benefits you, benefits Hawaiians, benefits everybody. You gotta be strategic. Haunani-Kay Trask was the loudest Hawaiian independence leader, and when she started saying, effing haole this, and I hate the U.S., and I hate America, and blah, 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 she scares away potential supporters. You make people not want to sympathize with you. In fact, I think like she was probably paid by the U.S. government to sound as stupid as possible, to say the most stupidest, outlandish stuff to scare away supporters. Oh, how are we going to control Hawaii? How are we going to make sure Hawaii is under the U.S.? Oh, let's have some Hawaiian-looking person say the most outlandish stuff to scare away all the Europeans and Asians, whatever. So I think she probably get paid by the U.S. to make the Hawaiians independence look stupid. We can't have that. I'm glad she's like not as prominent as before, but there's the 125th anniversary of the overthrow coming up. Trask was the most prominent speaker of the 100th anniversary in 1993. So I hope she's not the main one speaking, but she is. I hope she learned something about being strategic. Like for example, like Bumpy Kanahele, he's one of the better leaders. He's inviting. He like when he's being interviewed by one reporter who happened to be Middle Eastern ancestry. She asked, "Oh, are we welcome?" Yeah, he said, "You're welcome, but you gotta learn the history. You gotta learn the history. You gotta learn the culture. You gotta respect the culture." And that's the right way to do it. He wants, because Bumpy Kanahele wants Hawaiian independence, but he also understands that you gotta educate like the white population, whether it's the European, Asian, other people that, hey, Hawaii can benefit. Of course, he had this controversy in the past where he said tourists go home, but I think he learned from that. It's like, let's not do that. That's not a way to do it, And later on, he started passing out leaflets saying, okay, tourists, welcome to Hawaii, but this is our history, and this is what our cause is, which is a better way to do it. Invite people to support your movement. Or there's another Hawaiian leader I like is Kili Akina. He has more like libertarian tendencies, and I don't know if he's a full-on independence leader, but he does has libertarian tendencies, and he's a part of Office Hawaiian Affairs. So he's trying to make the Office Hawaiian Affairs more focused on helping the needs of Native Hawaiians rather than just lobbying and all that stuff. But he's inviting. He wants the people of Europe, the European, Asian, other people to learn about Hawaiian history, to make them feel welcome. So I like a lot of Native Hawaiian leaders. Of course, Trask is the worst one, but that's what I say. I want Hawaii to be independent again. I think it can be independent again. It's been independent before. It can be again. I like the United States, but I also want Hawaii to run its own business, and the United States can run its own business. Just like the United States was able to convince enough people in the revolutionaries were able to convince Americans. We don't need to live under British control. Team T4, we can be independent, but we gotta make sure that Asians and Europeans, all the other groups in Hawaii feel welcome enough to say, maybe we won't have to worry about getting deported if the Hawaii independence movement wins. Then maybe we'll feel welcome and we'll work together. It's like Nelson Mandela was able to convince non-black South Africans, say, hey, welcome to stick around South Africa. We'll help each other out, and my leadership can help South Africa, and it did. Now, is every leader perfect? No, but I think Hawaii independence movement can help. gotta be strategic. So hopefully people can learn about it and think about it, and just be strategic, not reckless.